Welcome back to Why Blank Lost for Big Brother 26. I'm David Bloomberg, and I'm here with my co-host, Ovi Kabir, to discuss Kimo's game. But you know what? We could do that tomorrow. I think it would be more fun if we just like choreograph a song and dance routine now instead, and like we could get to the game stuff in a day or two, or maybe never.
David Bloomberg hates fun. All right, you got it here first. You didn't like our Julie song they put on? You didn't?
That's
Their
not.
favorite house
you-
guests?
You're not the first. Believe me. So many people who watch Big Brother only for fun and not strategy, the types of people who are not listening to this podcast, probably, whenever I say something on Twitter about, oh, they shouldn't have done this, they'll be like, why do you hate fun? It's like, it has nothing to do with fun. It has to do with strategy. I'm sorry. That's what we do here.
I think David just
Um,
wants a song made for him.
well, no, but
So I think.
I have a song for Kimo.
Oh, okay.
All right. All
Let me
right. Are
hear
you
it.
ready?
I'm
Okay.
ready.
Okay. Kimo, Kimo, how was his game? We know Kimo. It was pretty. Wait, we probably should, not write the song fully until we go over what he actually did.
I think that's smart. I think that's very
Yeah,
smart, David.
yeah. I mean, what he did besides writing songs, and we'll do that in the same way we do each week by comparing how he played to my rules for winning Big Brother, not singing Big Brother, winning Big Brother,
Oh,
which
brother.
I originally, oh, Big Brother. That's probably the name of his play. Oh, Big Brother.
We had a
Um,
long podcast in front of us. I can
we
see that
really
now.
don't. We really don't, which
No,
is the funny thing.
let
Um,
him live.
yeah. Um, I mean, there's a reason that I'm wearing this shirt. Try harder. I won't say what the
Oh,
rest of the shirt
you
says.
brought up
Try harder.
all the
Um,
the weaponry. I see this.
Yes. Now we'll analyze Kimo's actions using my rules and what we saw on TV, live feeds, interviews, and other information. And the most recent version of the rules is, of course, posted at robhasawebsite.com/Big Brother Rules. And I want to give a special thanks to my friend Jason for the intro idea. But he is not to blame for my singing. Don't. Now, this was the first week where I was so sure that the players were solid in who they were going to evict days ahead of time, that I started working significantly on notes for this podcast ahead of time. Because, I've got this podcast, and then in a few hours, I have the Survivor podcast. So I was like, okay, I'll do a little work ahead of time. And I'd say I was about halfway done by Wednesday. And then while Survivor was airing, all of a sudden I'm seeing these tweets come in from like Hamster Watch and saying Cam and Chelsea were flipping. And I responded and I'm like, this is a prank. You're doing that just because we're watching Survivor and we can't be watching the live feeds. But it was not. And I was so annoyed. I had flashbacks to Jag from last season. Although for Jag last season, I had literally written the whole podcast, the Lost Why Blank Lost podcast that will never air. But then, luckily for me, they came to their senses. So,
Did they?
okay, for my purposes, they came to their senses.
Kimo's number one fan right here, David Bloomberg. As you can
well,
see it.
number one fan of him going out. I don't know. It's like, and it's nothing against Kimo. It's just, hey, I had my notes mostly done halfway.
You did
done
have your
already,
notes.
So I got to root for myself.
You wrote it into existence.
So we usually have some other things to discuss about the week in general before we get to the rules. And this week, we don't have much other than to talk a little bit about Cam. Because we saw it on the live feeds. We saw it in the episode. He almost got himself nominated and even evicted because of his terrible comp play. I am not a, trivia person, but that might have been a first if it had happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got to play. You have to have a special ability to play so badly in competitions to make it to the final four and then still be seen to let's get him out because he's so bad. They were upset that he has not been pulling his weight within the Mackenzie and Chelsea train. And, it was laughable at first. It was like a joke, but then we're like, whoa, hold on. They might actually be serious about this. They're so upset that he has not pulled his weight in this trio of them. And If Cam came out and said this was a strategy, basically to hide all his ability, kudos to him. Unfortunately, Cam is probably really athletic in a lot of different ways. There's a lot of competitions he probably could win on maybe other shows. Big Brother, not so much.
Yeah. I mean, last week we talked about how viewers often believe players are throwing when they're doing poorly in comps. But it turns out other players can have the same thoughts, as we saw with Mackenzie and Chelsea. They, like you said, they were not happy with him. But the thing is, okay, let's say for a moment that he was throwing, that he has been throwing. It would make zero sense to do it at the final 5 veto comp. Even if they believed he didn't want any blood on his hands, he didn't want to make any decisions. The final 5 veto comp, he could have just won it and said, I'm not using it. I'm respecting the HOH. That's no blood whatsoever. But sometimes logic goes out the window after being locked in that house for so long.
I agree. I think it's mostly so much of that frustration, and it's been building up because for them they're thinking, when is Cam going to show up and help us out in this game outside of being a vote, which they really haven't needed him to be a vote in these type of things. So I think from Mackenzie's perspective, especially since she's also been kind of a comp beast here, and I mean, power to her, breaking some records here and the abilities of she's been winning. She's probably like, hey, like, are you gonna do anything here? Chelsea's winning here and there too, but like, Cam, I need your help here. Especially, I think also it hurts even more when you're a self-professed like beast, like you're gonna kill it, you're gonna do this, which Cam has been saying. But
well, yeah, I mean, he was a D1 football player, and then for him to admit, well, I had to take some breaks. And Mackenzie was just going nuts. Now, she was a little wrong. She said on the episode, in D1 athletics, you don't take breaks. There are no breaks. And I'm like, well, have you ever seen a football game? Because, yeah, they rotate players in and out quite a bit, actually, because they do get winded. Now, do they get winded because they're looking at comics and, going up a ladder and gliding across? Yeah, probably not. But, they do take breaks. I will give him that. It's just that none of the others apparently felt the need to take a break.
No, they did not. And I think it's just like the parallel of it. As viewers, it's just funny to see. I think it's always funny to see somebody who, professes they're athletic and easily can be seen like he's strong. He looks strong,
right?
And then you're just seeing him continually like fail at these competitions. Which at some point, I'm rooting for Cam to win something. At this point, I'm like, yeah, it'd be better if he doesn't win anything.
Yeah,
but I was willing myself like, Cam, you got this. Believe in yourself, and it didn't matter how much he believed himself. He was unfortunately in the same trio of Rabina, T-Core, and Kimo in the sense that they couldn't win a competition to save their life.
Yeah. In some cases, literally. Game life, literally.
Game life.
Besides Cam, did you have anything or anyone else you wanted to talk about before we go to our next segment?
I think it was just watching all these house guests also interact in the way I've enjoyed too this season. I think that's the one thing I just want to say off the base. That it's been fun seeing them strategize and also play. I know some people have been feeling it's been a little slow down, which every end game slows down a little bit.
Right.
But I've appreciated seeing there's still some nuances where anyone at this point outside of it, Rabina and Kimo would have turned on each other in some shape or form if they felt like it benefited their game. And I like that. I appreciate that. So sometimes it's a slower game. Some people are like, who watch movies. I had a friend I was just arguing with. He's like, man, first season of Game of Thrones was so boring. There was just so much talking, not enough action. I was like, what are you watching? What are you like? What that's the whole point of the show is the actual, the talking of it. So I enjoy watching these discussions we had this past week. So that's all I want to say. It's been enjoyable.
Yeah. So with that, let's move to our next segment. We do have something for Julie Chen Moonves is wrong about blank. It was only 8 words that she had to say to get into this segment this week. But they were so wrong that it's ridiculous. Dalton Ross asked her if Mackenzie made a fatal error by not taking out her biggest competition to win in Chelsea. And Julie said, no, it was too early to target Chelsea. Too early? It was final 5 heading into final 4. And Mackenzie was the HOH, so she couldn't win the next one. How long exactly should she wait?
Final 2.
Yeah,
Maybe after the winner is said as Chelsea, she should then try to take her out. Julie Chen does not believe in voting people out.
yeah,
And the reason why I'm on the board, usually I'll let David take his segment. I won't pile on. But you know what she said? She said this group of house guests was her favorite house guest. I did
yeah.
not sit a month in Camp Comeback with that outfit for her to say that. The pain I took in that outfit, it itched everywhere. I have rashes still. All
I
right.
mean, she's
Maybe
talking about the whole group, and unfortunately, you're part of a season of house guests that nobody is going to say was their favorite. I'm sorry. I
you tell me it's not a good PR answer to say Big Brother 21 is your favorite season of all time.
Probably not. Or, I mean, even if you, for some reason, like the season, um, saying that group of house guests is your favorite overall, certainly you and Cliff and a few others, are the cream that rises to the top.
I think maybe we might Cliff and I might bring a few others to make a song for Julie, and maybe that
There
will
you
convince
go.
her. But otherwise, until then, I'm on this segment for it.
Yeah.
This is why Julie's wrong.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we go ahead and get to the rules, I do want to mention, as we do each week, that the Survivor version of the rules comes in a shorter and much more colorful form as a poster. Go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed, scroll down to the poster and click on it and order it. In addition, you can keep scrolling and get the poster on a t-shirt or the checklist on a t-shirt, which is closer, not exact, but closer to the Big Brother rules. So again, you can go to robhasawebsite.com/yxlostfeed to get any of those. All right. Well, there was a time when Kimo and T-Core flipped Big Brother 26 on its head.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like they had the potential to control the game. But then it never materialized. Indeed, most of the time we saw Kimo, he was being nominated. Sure, everybody loved him, but what happened to his game? Was he ever really the force we thought he was? Or was it all about the song and dance? At RHAP, we know reality TV, and we know why Kimo lost. Now, this week, we're going to start where Kimo did the best, and that is in the fifth rule, which says players need to pretend to be nice and play the social game. Kimo wasn't really pretending. He's just a really, really nice guy. Everybody loved him, whether they were strategically on his side or against him. And that's why we're talking about this rule first, because we could say some positive things about him before we get to the other rules when we're going to have a lot of things to say about him that aren't positive. Last week, we talked about how many times Angela was used as a pawn because people knew that up against her, the actual target would go. And the same was true of Kimo. Like I said, everyone there just really liked him and didn't want him to go home. Even the one time he was supposed to be the target, he apparently did the inconceivable and convinced two people to change their votes through his final words before they walked into that voting booth, talking about how important the game was to him and who he was representing.
Kimo, if you have a video game and you can put your points on stats, Kimo was maxed out 100 on social. He was so incredible in this regard. I think as trends see, I might be a bit kinder to Kimo than David will be as it goes on. But I think we both can agree in this category. Kimo didn't have to pretend. He was so kind. His story was so great. And he was so genuine. And I think we see that in Big Brother at points, but very rarely does it actually impact the game on a game level in which players want to change their game when they're even against him based on how that person just acts and talks. Kimo was that person, and it was really cool to see that. I mean, he talked himself, like you mentioned, David, off being evicted. He talked himself into alliances. I mean, he talked himself in such a way where within alliance or other groups, people understood that, hey, we should try to convince Kimo to vote some way else against T-Core or Rabin or these things, or convince other people to vote against him in that group because we know how much they care about him and how he cares. I mean, I think it's really impressive we see that in Kimo. for a person who was on the block basically every other week does not become a social pariah. I mean, he still was really beloved by the entire house, and that's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Cam said a little while ago, Kimo is a very, very, very good social player. And of course, they all know he had a lot of connections in the jury. Others said, pretty much the same thing. Eh, This makes it even stranger that we saw Cam say on Thursday's show that he thought he could beat Kimo in the social aspect. Yeah, sorry, Cam, that was not going to happen. I would argue that Kimo had the best social presence in the house by far.
I think that's almost a testament to Kimo's social game as well, because he made other players so like in tune, that feeling that he's not a threat. I mean, we'll talk about that, but socially wise, that he's not as much of a threat, or he's somebody that can make other people comfortable, where they can take him to the end. I mean, I don't know if it's as much of a downfall of Cam that think he thought of maybe a combination versus Kimo making him feel comfortable enough that he can. So I think it was really cool that Kimo, I mean, the only thing I think his unfortunate issue he had was the chewing of his food that seemed to drive some of the house guests kind of crazy. I think he saw some arguments with that, the slurping here and there. But power to Kimo. He likes his food. I love my food. Eat it the way you want to eat it. And but overall, I think it was impressive to see how he navigated utilizing that social game. My only frustrations, I guess, with it was it's so strong that we saw the same issue that T-Core had, that once they got in that trio over the group, they really stayed insulated within there. So I wish he let his social
Yes.
game allow him to make some one-on-one connections game-wise. I think he really could have with other players.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good transition. Talking about game wise, back to rule one, which I always note is the most important, and that's for a reason. It says to scheme and plot, because just being in the game while people like you, almost never enough. You need to make actual moves to push yourself further. You need to defend yourself. You need to play. You need to try harder. Um, Last week, I started this rule by saying Leah had no idea that this was part of the game for at least the first half of the season. I think Kimo did know it was part of the game, or at least supposed to be part of the game, but he just didn't do it. He was happy being social. And if that meant people were going to nominate him over and over and over again, who is he to push back and advocate for himself? Earlier in the season, we frequently referred to T-Core and Kimo as a unit and gave them both props when they would make a move. Looking back, I wonder if we gave him too much credit all that time, and if it was really T-Core doing all of it, because on his own, and even often with T-Core, he really did not play Big Brother. Sure, he was in some alliances, and obviously he had the trio, but what did he actually do to play?
Yeah, I mean, I think here's what we have different. There's different perspectives of playing the game, right? Correct. As to how you want to strategize in here, and then maybe outlasting people and players. I think that was a bit of more of Chemo's strategy here, that he would continuously outlast people, and again, you run amok to that point eventually, that where you're like, well, there's only so many people to pick off from. And I think he played that strategy as well as he could, where he was able to, even while being a target, maneuver himself in positions where he wasn't going home. Again, probably at the mercy of other players. I do think there was some form of strategy. I think it was impressive that how he was able to eventually bring Angela to his side, where she didn't really want to target him anymore after she targeted him continuously 2 times around. Again, there's some luck that's involved with it, with the house
Yeah.
feeling like, okay, we should go from other people. But I think Chemo's strategy, what seemed to emerge, was make it as far as I can to this point, and then I think the end game was a little lost to him in that sense. I really wish I saw some more. Let's take the Outlast version when we have this power 2 of him and Rabina now. Even T Core, like that power 3 lasted a lot longer than it probably should have, with
Right.
them not being able to win any competitions. So them getting that far. Again, when T Core left, it seemed like you mentioned, the driver's seat was a little away. He didn't have an end game, and that was his primary issue. I find I don't
Yeah.
really have as much of an issue with the game Chemo played to that point, because it was more of like, I don't like liking it to cockroach, because I don't feel like that's like
No. Yeah.
but he was able to survive, outlast, and it was a lot of it because of his own merit and being having those conversations. It goes back to his social game. The end game is what did him in.
Yeah, but just surviving, we talked about this before, just surviving. There are times it can work. Like you said, if you have an end game idea. But he just had plenty of opportunities to play
Yeah.
strategically, and he kept putting them off or ignoring them completely. Um, quite frankly, the examples are too numerous to even mention. But let's discuss a few of the most egregious. We've talked about this before, but T-Core and Kimo would spend hours talking to each other about what they should tell Quinn. And then after all that, they would either not get around to it, or they did talk to him, but they didn't actually tell him what they were supposed to, such as with all the Leah information that would have been potentially helpful for him to know and might have actually brought him more to their side. And then as we move forward in the game a bit, I had in my notes, Kimo basically hasn't campaigned since he was nominated, spending almost all his time with T-Core and Rubina. Now, here's the thing. If I asked you or any listener, what day did I type that note? Nobody would be able to answer. It is evergreen. Now, as it happens, I wrote it in early September, but it literally could have been any time, up to and including yesterday, if I took out T-Core's name. I mean, shortly after I originally wrote that note, I also wrote about how Cam suggested to Kimo that he start talking more game with people. Cam suggested somebody start talking more game. And even then, Kimo didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that was the unfortunate thing, is that I think Kimo, and that's why he was able to do so far. He was a really good player in a group where it's like, we need the vote, you need somebody to kind of corral things, bounce ideas off. The end game, and also I wish he had a particular agency by himself playing the game. Some specific connections outside that T-Core Rubina group, something that was unique to himself, whether it was a relationship with Quinn, and I think we kind of saw it slightly at the end with Angela, but that was forged mostly by his social game happenstance. And I think Angela eventually feeling like a strange bond with him, because they're the two that survived the fire,
Well, right. And she felt bad also that
Yeah.
two weeks in a row, she quote unquote wanted to vote to keep him, but was more or less tricked into not. And I think that made her like want to prove, oh no, Kimo, I really do love you,
Exactly. And I wish almost that they could have had this special little working relationship a little bit more than what was shown, or that he utilized, because like you said, I think the saddest thing for Kimo, there's a lot of missed opportunities right here. And I mean, for that group specifically, but for Kimo in general, because I think he had the ability to make those inroads if he wanted to. And it's interesting to see somebody so social like him not want to make those game relationships.
Right.
Typically, when we see social players, like, that's kind of their bread and butter. We kind of see that in T-Core, who had a good social game in a lot of ways, and she wanted to utilize that for her benefit. But with Kimo, he was so hands off. Like, the numerous reasons that you listed, and plus so many more, are just kind of wondering, why did it happen?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you mentioned the numerous reasons. Well, fast forward to this week, final five. Kimo on the block against his closest ally, Rubina. Mackenzie wins the veto. So, of course, Kimo made his way to talk to her so he could make his own case for keeping him around and maybe even using the veto to put up Cam or Chelsea on the block, right? Right? No, of course not. Time passed. Kimo was busy doing Kimo things, which definitely did not include strategizing. Mackenzie had told Chelsea and Cam that she wasn't going to do specific one-on-one meetings, but people could come to her. So, of course, he didn't. Even when she kind of hinted by making it clear she was available, nothing. In fact, Kimo even commented to Rubina, wondering, does Mackenzie want to talk? Because she keeps hanging around. Yeah, great game awareness there, Kimo. Now, as it happens, as we were recording, his interview with Mike Bloom came out. And the very first thing that he said was about this week. And he said that not approaching Mackenzie to use the veto on me this week is definitely a regret that I do have. I don't think I handled that situation very well. And he's right. I'm glad he sees it now. Apparently he talked to Mackenzie late, just before the eviction or something like that he got this information. Too little, too late. I mean, you've been in this game, what is it now, 80 days or something? And you still didn't know to do that on your own? I I I don't even understand it. And Chelsea and Mackenzie talked about it too. They said it was ridiculous that Kimo wouldn't talk to the veto holder the night before the veto meeting when he was on the block. And maybe Kimo assumed that there would be no point. But this was actually where they were pissed at Cam and Mackenzie considered using the veto and nominating him. So, in other words, it was the perfect timing for Kimo to go in there and push his case, but no.
No, I mean, I think whether it was the feeling of Rubina being on the block, like he didn't want to campaign against her or try, like he resigned himself to it. I'm not sure because, like you said, this week was truly in favor for him to do it. I felt like he kind of just was ready to go home if it was against Rubina. He was ready to fall. So it just because Rubina, I really appreciated her saying that, and I wouldn't have faulted her either way if she said, I'm going to campaign against him. But she was like, I'm not going to campaign against him, but I'm going to advocate for myself. And I think that was the issue we didn't see Kimo for. And I think, we say this about a lot of other players, but Kimo's the type of player I do think that if he ever were to come back or play this game, he could do really phenomenally well because his level of social would stay there, and he just needs to implement the game strategy. Like he needs to want. Needs to have an effort. You disagree?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'd like to believe it's true. But he was a fan of this show before coming in here. He was not a recruit. He was not a Mackenzie. He knew what he was getting into, and he still didn't do it. I don't know that it would change. I think that it's just I don't think it's in his personality. I think it's in his personality to, as Julie says, love one another. I don't think it's in his personality to strategize with one another.
Maybe that should be her next tagline. She said,
"Well, yeah,
we strategize with one another."
Like, if she listened to me, it would be. But I do want to mention that in addition to him not campaigning for the veto, it didn't even stop there. We discussed how at the last minute it looked like there was a possibility to to keep Kimo, but from what we saw on live feeds before they went off for the show, he once again didn't bother advocating for himself. Another instance of it being the perfect time for him to give some reasons to keep him around. Rubina talked to Chelsea. Now, I'm not entirely sure did Chelsea initiate that, but either way, if Kimo had been paying attention, he'd have been like, why is Chelsea talking to Rubina? There's only 5 of them in the house. He should have been able to know where people were. And that's what you have to do. You have to know what's going on, have game awareness, and then swoop in.
You need to. And I think that was like that's the most frustrating portion of it because I do feel like he got himself in such good positions of it, and you just need to finish the deal. But to finish the deal, you need to want to finish the deal. You need to have that. And I'm not trying to say that Kimo didn't want to win. He didn't have that drive for, but what it seemed like from the stuff when he was going against Rubina, because I think I saw a little bit more from Kimo on weeks when it wasn't him against his ally.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the last couple of weeks it's between him, Tico. So I just feel like this last week it was more so that if it happens, if I can stay, if they really want me to stay, great. But I don't want to be a catalyst to do that and get my friend out. And I think that's kind of the catch-22 you have when you become really close with somebody in the house. Typically, you find people understandably ready to advocate each other at that point. But for Kimo, I think since he built his game like that, his personality seems around there. It's it's tough. But here we judge how their game is played, not how good of a person they are. While Kimo's a great person, the strategy right here, especially this last week, was just not up to par.
Yeah, I think what you said is right. Did he want to win the game? Yes. Was he willing to do what it took to win the game? No. At least not from this standpoint.
Yeah.
So we can move into the second rule, which says not to scheme and plot too much and to keep your scheming secret. Considering that we just discussed Kimo not scheming enough, it might seem like we wouldn't have much to say about him here. But in fact, we do, because to quote myself from the YT Core Lost podcast, uh, there's a pesky little part that warns against being in an obvious tight duo. Often that comes in the form of a showmance, but it doesn't have to. It can be any two people. And the funny thing is that in Brooklyn's post eviction interviews, she called T-Core and Kimo a showmance, just different from any we've seen. They're a pair. But being in an obvious duo wasn't enough, so they made a trio with Rubina and added her as another person to spend all their time with in order to make it even more obvious. Now, this, of course, didn't change when T-Core was evicted. It just brought them back down to an incredibly obvious duo again instead of an incredibly obvious trio.
Very much so. And I think the only thing that was sad that it was I was hoping that he would be able to utilize in this portion is that when T Core is away, let's bring somebody else to be our trio. Let's bring our third in here. Let them understand whether it's Mackenzie, it's somebody else. Cam and Chelsea, you're probably not going to touch, but having to understand we need to bring somebody in to be our third. That way we can work forward with it. And they would feel like, okay, some people don't want to be the bottom of the totem pole, obviously, but when you're like out there, you might be thinking, okay, I can work with them a little longer. But I will say, I think there was one portion where I do feel like it's funny. He overplayed to a point where it was underplaying, where I think it was with the Quinn situation where him, Tico, they go back and forth so much about these, what to do here, that they're like, we shouldn't do anything. And I think that happened a bit with his game strategy where we saw, wait, they didn't actually do anything, but there was a lot of thought and thinking and conversation that they would go back and forth. The issue was they just bounced it within that triangle, and it never left that triangle to be action. So in a way, Kimo overplayed himself.
Yeah.
He played himself
Yeah.
by not allowing himself to actually take action when he needed to.
Yeah. Now, there were some other ways where he was too close to someone besides just the trio. It happened earlier with Tucker as well. While he thought it wasn't obvious, uh, Chelsea told others about how those two had been sleeping in the same room, but then Kimo would wake Tucker up and they'd leave and go talk elsewhere. And of course, we know that after Quinn confided in him about his secret power, Kimo told Tucker. And then, aside from forming obvious connections, Kimo also did something last week that made a lot of us laugh at how bad it was. Mackenzie was telling him that she was going to veto him off the block. And rather than just accepting it and being grateful, he kept being way too honest and giving her reasons she shouldn't do it. He needed to just shut up. If she hadn't been so overcome by the Chelsea missed brain fog, she might have realized that he was right and she shouldn't have done it. He was lucky that she didn't actually listen to him.
Yeah, I mean, many times in his conversations with people, he was so honest about things that it started making them feel like, wait, should I be able to keep Kimo? Should I keep him? Or should I put him on a pawn? And he was so honest about these different portions of his conversations with other people or how he was playing the game. It worked both ways. Sometimes I think it was too honest, but at the same time, I wonder if it's what kept people like, I can trust Kimo. I know he can be, he's so genuine. I'll keep him around. So he was truly a unique player in that way where he would talk himself into situations, but also because he talked himself into situations, they felt comfortable enough to keep him around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was catch-22 for sure with him.
All right. Well, we can go to the third rule, which talks about the need to be flexible. How do you think Kimo did here?
Oh, brother, or big brother, as David would say. Kimo was not very flexible, which is really weird to say that about a player who was on the block as much as he was, but he just didn't change the way he played the game from week 1, 2. I feel like till the end of the week, especially maybe there was a little bit more flexibility until he got that solidified three, some with him, T Core, and Rubina. But I mean, I don't know if you disagree with me or not, David, but on this one, I just feel like I wanted him to be able to there be a chance for him to like not turn on Rubino Tico, but think of the game for himself in a way and how it could benefit him further. And we just didn't see that throughout.
Yeah, I really didn't have anything in my notes for this rule when going through the whole season, because how can you be flexible when you're not really doing anything in the game? He had no plans, so he couldn't have any backup plans. He had one alliance, so there weren't any side alliances or sub alliances. E- Even when he and T-Core were presented with that possibility by Quinn, way back when, they blew it up. So yeah, you're right. He was not flexible. He had his people, and those were the people he was going with. Period.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add to this portion is that it's not exactly with it, but it's so frustrating that he was so inflexible with his group, but he didn't use them as a like as a hammer. You're a threesome it far into the game. You're strong. You're a voting block. Put some fear into the other players. They were worried about them, and they're like, no, we don't need to make a coalition around each other, work with someone, and just keep on taking player one by one by one. Like it felt like they didn't. It's kind of like when you play. I don't have a little brother. I'm the youngest brother, but little cousins. When you play a video game, you handicap yourself a little bit. You like give them a few points on this stuff, or you set the settings differently, so that way it's a more of a fair game. That's what I felt like they were trying to do with their season. They're like, let's take off this person here could work with this. Okay, now let's take out the other side. Okay, somebody else who would want to work with it. It was
Mm-hmm.
so frustrating because it felt like they wanted to keep it level and not use this advantage for themselves of being that group. So I really wish he utilized his inflexibility to get himself farther if he was not going to be flexible. And he did not do that.
All right. Well, the fourth rule says players should not let their emotions control them. But I mean, it seems Kimo was pretty much all emotion. Well, let's say 99%. There was a very small amount of him that understood it was a game. He just didn't listen to that 1%. Um, he and Rabina even acknowledged as much when Tucker was voted out because they noted that the others, quote, were thinking with their brains. We were thinking with our hearts. Now, did that recognition change anything? No, don't be silly.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see that like his emotions and everything, the way he played the game. Um, it did hamper him in the way where we see in all these portions of it, where it's like he's not changing, leaving from his group. He might not be strategizing against his teammates when he's on the block. But at the same time, too, I do think his emotions and his conversations, especially his eviction speech. I mean, first time
Yeah.
I've seen him in a very long time, convince people to keep him in the game. So it, Kimo's a really interesting player, and the reason I say this is that because his faults were a really good strength for him too. That he was able to use those emotions to convince other people. It's just that he needed to harness his own faults a little bit because they were really manageable, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why I also still think again I feel probably more strong about that Kimo would be a really good player coming back if he was able to just look at what he did this season, continue doing the same things, but also, hey, let's like take a step forward with strategizing and take a step back from like feeling these feelings about not cutting my friends. So
I mean, don't get me wrong. If there's an All Stars, I would love to see him come back and play the game. I'm just not convinced he can do it. So now earlier a minute ago I mentioned the Tucker vote, and I do want to mention, of course, we said, before Kimo had T-Core, he had Tucker, and Kimo said at one point that he had a crush on Tucker, and it was clouding his judgment. From what we watched, I agree. I really do feel like in the early game that affected some of his decisions. And then he also seemed to lose a bit of oomph for a while when Tucker was evicted. I mean, it mostly came back. I won't say he ever, suddenly was playing the game as we've been saying, but emotions did affect him throughout the game. All right. Well, we could go to the sixth rule, which warns against being too much of a threat. Back in the fifth rule, which we had started with, we talked about how much everybody loved Kimo and also how he may have done the near impossible and changed 2 votes with his final speech earlier in the season. That is definitely not someone you want to take to the end with you.
nope.
We already know he almost certainly would have had T-Core and Rubina's votes. And then Angela made it clear how close she was to him as she was walking out the door. So if you're another player, you're doing some math here. in a hypothetical situation where you get to the end against him, he only needs one more vote to win. There is
Mhm.
no way any other player should even consider taking the risk of going to final two with him.
They shouldn't. And it was kind of surprising in a way too that he became a sleeper pick for a threat level, like a player as the game started going. It felt like it was exponential. And I feel like the players really saw it happen because when they're at 3-7, they made to jury, you have T Core Rubina. That's two easy votes for him if they are both out, or vice versa for any of them. And I felt like they kind of woke up a little bit, and she kind of who knows if it would have changed the result, but inadvertently might have hurt Kimo. Where Angelo is so prominent in her love for Kimo and talking about, I will vote for him and I was going to bring him, blah, blah. Um, we see these players really feel some sort of way for Kimo. Where if you told me before the halfway point, if Chelsea was masterminding all this, Mackenzie had this list of POVs, blah blah, and all these HOHs on her comp, and the person that was going to rival them and could actually beat them was Kimo at the end with a lot of the accolades. I would have been really surprised. I don't think most people would have bet for that to happen, but as we saw, he was really coming in his way, and if Kimo made it to the final two, it would have been a very interesting game he could have talked about because he would have broken a lot of our rules, but at the same time, he would have gotten to the end and he would have survived his way to the end while still making all the social connections. So truly, no blood on his hands.
Yeah, I mean, in order for him to have made it to final two, he almost certainly would have had to start following some of the rules, or the other players would have had to break them even worse,
Yep.
But even aside from looking ahead to the end, I noted in the YT Core Lost podcast how dangerous they had been as a trio and how they did a terrible job of managing their threat level. Even then, you mentioned earlier, it was surprising how far they made it into the game as a trio. One of the examples I mentioned was Kimo saying that week that they weren't a threat because they didn't win comps. And like I said, he's a fan. He should know better. While comps can come into play in a decision, they are not the major factor, usually, in other people deciding whether you're a threat. The major factor, especially at this point in the game, unless you're Julie, is whether you'd beat them, which he would. And that's why it was frustrating to hear that Chelsea seemed to take Cam's side temporarily on Wednesday when he wanted to flip and keep Kimo. Anyone voluntarily letting this man get closer to the end would have been crazy.
Yeah, and his story is so good. We already know he can tell his story, but the story he can now weave that he has been on the block week in and week out. He has seen his allies go in and out. He has survived this. He has a way to he can talk about how he should win the game without needing any of those wins or needing all that stuff, which was impressive as it kept continue to build up. And like we always say, your threat level is relative to people next to you. So at that point right there, when you're counting down jury votes, you're seeing, oh, wait, we have a smaller jury here. Oh, wait, two of those people, do the math right there. For 2 out of 7 people are instant votes from. Actually, hold on, maybe it's 3 out of 7 now. That's almost half it. He needs one, like you mentioned, only one more vote. I mean, he comes immensely powerful. Chelsea could do whatever she wanted at that point, but if he gets 3 votes, he just needs to convince literally one person who might be slightly jaded at Chelsea at the end. I'm saying Chelsea is or Mackenzie or Cam.
Yeah. All right. Well, the 7th rule says to trust almost nobody. And obviously, Kimo trusted T-Core and Rubina completely. I just don't know that it particularly hurt him, the trust part. You already talked about, how not being willing to go against Rubina hurt him, but the trust part. It was interesting, though, that Rubina, again, as you mentioned, at least campaigned for herself a little, which was certainly more than Kimo did. So if he trusted her to do nothing like he was doing, he was wrong. I was going to say that I don't really think she did anything to sway people, but she actually might have, because some of the things she said came up in conversations as the possible flip against her was being considered. Meanwhile, nothing that Kimo said could be considered because he didn't say anything.
Yeah, I think in this one it's interesting because out of the whole threesome of them, maybe we've seen it if Tico was near the end with them. It seemed almost the most equitable threesome of a group we've seen there, where they all trust each other and didn't want to backstab one another. Really, I think
Mhm.
the mutual love for each other they had, and I mean, Tico was closer to um, Chemo, and Rubina seemed to actually be slightly closer to Chemo as well. So I, I don't know, trusting him too much really hurt their game because they actually looked out for him as well. I do think though, I almost wish he trusted a few other people, like we've mentioned, a little bit more that he could have worked
Mhm.
with. I think maybe because he was so stuck and strong with these two other folks, it just was he was unable to allow himself to kind of give up that trust to other people, or maybe his worry was that if he starts trusting other people, he loses his trust from T-Core and Rabina. So again, I don't think this portion, like you mentioned, really faulted his game too much. But at the same time, an area of improvement that might have been able to change the dynamic for him to be able to do what he needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we could move to Appendix A, which is about the jury phase of the game and deals both with how Chemo was doing and preparing to possibly be at the end himself, as well as whether the other remaining players did what they needed to do to get him on their side at the end and how he'll impact the jury. We already discussed how there was no way anyone should have wanted to face him in the end, but that wasn't because he had some big strategy to get the jurors on his side. It was like everything else we've been discussing, based entirely on his social game. But it still would have worked for him if he could have gotten there.
Very much so. I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Right.
And he had a great strategy to get these votes. It was a social game. So why try to convince them otherwise? If he has 3 votes in the bag now, why change it up? Try to get one
Right.
more person. He just needs to convince one more person who's a little jaded. And here's the great thing is the people who are left in the jury and also here, they don't have bad feelings towards Chemo. If anything, they still feel pretty good about Chemo. The other players might be a little more jaded by against the other player. Like, how can you hate on Keem? Like, he didn't get me home. He didn't win a
Right.
competition to get me home. Actually, he's just kind of survived and thrived and made social connections. So, very tough on that point. On the back end of it, I'm curious to see how he will now impact the jury being a
Yes.
part of it between him, Angela, and Rubina. I'm not 100% sure if, not sorry, Rubina, not T-Core, if Angela will be in their group now within there. They could be still a trio who votes together now. But I'm very interested to see who he will end up, if he will try to influence the jury or who he wants to give the vote to outside of Rubina.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if Rubina makes it to the end somehow, she would have his vote.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I think Chelsea has his vote because not necessarily as much because of Chemo himself, but because he'll get there and he'll talk to the other jurors. And we heard from them in their segment. They clearly recognize how she has controlled the game.
Hmm.
And we also know that T-Core favors Chelsea. Chemo has been T-Core's minion. I just see little chance that that will change.
Yeah, I agree.
So, with that, it is about time to wrap things up. What are your final thoughts about Chemo?
Oh, Chemo. I appreciated watching him throughout this entire season. He was a delight in so many ways. And more so because, I didn't have any expectations. I didn't know how Chemo would play this game. And the way he played the game was a very social game. And we saw him, unlike some of the other players in this house, he was the opposite of it. And typically, when a player is completely social and does not strategize at all, I don't tend to love watching him there. With Chemo is different because seeing him survive in and out, him surviving, I started to get more impressed with him as the weeks gone by. Do I think he is the best strategist in the world? No. Do I feel like there was a lot of missed opportunities? Yes. But at the same time, I appreciated his ability to navigate the game in a way he did without actually truly getting any blood on his hands, but still being able to make an impact on the players. If he got to the final two, I would have found this one of the most impressive winners in a lot of ways, where he just won a social game alone. He was able to convince people to like him. And let us not forget that he was able to convince people on the day of his eviction through his speech on live time to keep him there. That's a talent alone that very few houses are able to do. Overall, though, it amounts to nothing unless you have an end game to finish the game down there. If you don't have the nuts and bolts to put your project together, it's just going to fall apart. And that's what we saw for Kimo. I don't know if it was whether the desire to win the game was less or it was just the desire, like David said, to go against his best teammate, Rubina. Either or, he lost the game. I appreciate him. If he comes back and he changes his strategy, I think he has a great chance for it. Otherwise, though, on Big Brother 26, his time has come to an end.
Yeah, Kimo came into Big Brother as a big fan of watching the game. And through his time in the house, it seemed to be that he continued to be a big fan of watching the game. There's really no way to avoid saying this bluntly. Through much of his time in Big Brother, Kimo sat around and let the game happen around him. He was friends with everyone, which is great. People really did love him. If he had somehow made it to the end, there is a very good likelihood he would have won because of it. But there's that big problem of needing to get to the final two to make that happen. And he had no plan for that. He made himself into a threat without any thought of how to counter or deflect it or use the way people felt about him to his own advantage. And the frustrating thing is we know he had that ability because he did it. Maybe accidentally, but he did it when he got two people to change their votes and keep him in the game earlier. For a while, Kimo often talked game with T-Core and Rubina and talked and talked and talked, but talking isn't doing. Even when his own game life was on the line, he didn't bother to meet with the person who held the power, given multiple opportunities. At the start of the podcast, I said we needed to go over what Kimo did in the game before writing his final song. Well, now it's time. Kimo, Kimo, he was not mean, no. Kimo, Kimo, but he didn't really schemo. Kimo, Kimo, his game was not primo, and that is why Kimo lost. You're muted. They can't. Everybody can't hear your applause.
I was applauding for David. I was not trying to be quiet. I muted myself so I could let his voice ring. You know, that alone, Kimo deserves 500K at least because he made David Bloomberg sing on here. Anyone who thinks this stuff is rehearsed by us at all should be, this thought should be gone now because I did not know David had his full song like that. Our swan song for Kimo. Truly, wow. I need that for every house guest, honestly.
No,
this last Final Four, I want to hear a
nobody
song
else
for
needs
each of
that
them.
either. You know, poor people with playing it in their headphones are probably like, my ears are bleeding.
I need that on an edit right now. I just need that song playing back and forth. But well said, David. As always, well said. And well sung.
Well, thank you. Well, we will have our spoiler-free predictions in a moment after a few other pieces of information. In addition, if you want our full spoilery thoughts, you could find us all over social media.
That is correct. Don't forget, both of us, are very active on a number of different social media platforms where we discuss Big Brother and other topics. On Twitter, I am at the Kabir. On Instagram, I'm at Kabir. And on TikTok, I am at Basmati Boy. But Dave is truly all over the place, but you can track him down in a few ways. And the one way is his Linktree at Linktree/David Bloomberg. Linktree/David Bloomberg. And you can find him on Twitter and Blue Sky at David Bloomberg, on Threads at David Bloomberg TV. And as it's linked to Instagram, he's at David Bloomberg TV on all video platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Yeah, I've been posting on the video sites. For the past couple weeks, like 4 per day. Sometimes 5. Yesterday was 5. And that's all like you said, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, mostly been about Big Brother and Survivor with the occasional one from The Circle, which just ended. That's dropped in. From the new show that CBS has been promoting, The Summit, from The Anonymous, from whatever shows are coming out. I'm putting some videos out about them, but again, mostly Big Brother and Survivor. So as I mentioned, of course, every week our predictions are spoiler free. So we, came up with these before we even knew the outcome of the HOH comp. With Mackenzie unable to compete and Cam being useless in challenges, like we said, I don't think it's a difficult prediction to say Chelsea will win HOH again. I've and then I've seen no indication that she will deviate from the plan that she's voiced several times, which is to try to get to the end with Cam and Mackenzie. So she will try to target Rubina. But we all know that at Final Four, the veto winner is the one who gets to really make that decision, unless Chelsea herself wins veto, in which case she decides who gets to decide under my scenario. Again, given the challenge situation, I think either Chelsea or Mackenzie will win veto, and they will indeed follow through with the plan to evict Rubina.
You know what? A broken clock has to be right twice a day. And hopefully, my predictions have been wrong every single time, but I'm hoping they're right this time. I want Rubina to win this one, show it out, come in there. And I think at this point, the veto holder chooses, but I think Chelsea and Cam go up. So I think Rubina, I have a feeling for her this time.
Okay. So wait, so who's going then?
Oh, who's going? I think Chelsea goes home. I think they wake up and realize that Chelsea needs to go. If I think if anybody, she should be the one to go home. I mean, I truly believe if you're not Chelsea, you need to get Chelsea out because I don't think any of them are beating her right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, that brings us to a programming note that we have here, which is our podcasting plans for the Final Four are not set in stone. We did this last season too. We have the fourth place eviction coming up on Thursday, and then we have the finale on Sunday. It would be a quick turnaround to do two separate podcasts there. And it would not just for people at home listening, it would be, a quick turnaround. We might do it if something else happens. And like, for example, Ovi is right and Chelsea is evicted in fourth place. Otherwise, we will likely do the same thing that we did last year, talk about all of the Final Four in a single podcast a couple of days after the finale. So watch for that.
Yep. And as we wrap up, I want to encourage people to check out our RHAP patron program at robhasawebsite.com patron. Rob has several patron-only podcasts for Big Brother, plus other perks like the Facebook group and Discord. You can help support shows like ours and everything on the network by becoming a patron at robhasawebsite.com/patron.
And make sure you're subscribed to all of the RHAP podcasts by going to our YX Lost feed, or subscribe directly to all of the newly rebranded RHAP We Know Reality TV podcasts by going to WeKnowRealityTV.com and selecting your podcast service of choice. You'll not only find content like us and daily live feed updates and everything else, as Big Brother winds down, but also, of course, Survivor as it's, continuing to ramp up, and a number of other shows and topics as well. Speaking of Survivor podcasts, in a few hours, Jessica Lewis and I will be recording our third Survivor 47 Why Blank Lost with special guest Heidi Laguerre Greenblatt. As I've mentioned, we've still got, I guess, 2 weeks of doing double Why Blank Lost duty. And plus, on top of that, I've been co-hosting the Tradar podcast coverage of the Traders Canada Season 2. So we just had our second week of that, and I had a special guest co-host of Sam Smith from the Traders New Zealand Season 1. So if you want to find that anywhere, that's Tradar, Traidar.
And now I want to finish up and say thank you to Scott St. Pierre, Jessica Sterling, and the whole RHAP and reality TV wrap-ups behind the scenes for all the work they do, editing and posting and everything else. We really appreciate everything you do to get our voices from our microphones to your ears. And thank you, David, for your incredible singing. And the rendition was wonderful. I'm so thankful to hear that. And then lastly, I got to thank all of you for watching and listening and tuning in and week out. We're coming to the end of our Big Brother season. So please just let us know what you think. Let us know on social media or in the comments below what you think of this season. Do you think it was the right decision to send our beautiful, incredible Kimo out? And who do you think is going to win? How do you think it's going to end up? I want to hear your thoughts. We want to hear your thoughts, and just let us know.
All right, and thank you, of course, Ovi. It just occurred to me, if we're not going to be here again until the finale, we probably should have made a prediction, official,
Mm.
of who is going to win. I will take the obvious prediction and say Chelsea. You are predicting Chelsea goes.
Mhm.
So who do you think is going to win? Therefore,
I think Mackenzie's going to win. I think
okay.
she's going to comp it out, and I just don't see a world where if Chelsea goes home now, I mean, we could be surprised. Maybe it's Cam, but the dogs at the
Yeah.
crib would be very happy about that, I
Yes.
imagine. But I'm putting Mackenzie as my vote.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me here once again. Thank you to all of the listeners and viewers. Again, watch for my Survivor Why Blank Lost on Saturday. And we will either be back in a week or a few days after the finale, as we mentioned. Until then, bye, everyone.